Brown. Welcome to this week's MFB News. Hope everybody has had a good week. So look, in terms of where we are this week, I'm just going to give you the kind of headline. Things have improved since last week. I think you need to hear that before you invest time watching the rest of this video. So things have improved a bit from last week's video where we talked about what was going on in the bond markets and the impact on swap rates and therefore mortgage rates. So we're going to give you an update on pricing this week, give you a kind of summary of, indicative mortgage rates so you can kind of get a feel for what mortgages actually cost at the moment. We're going to go through some changes in lending criteria, which in turn raise up some interesting points, which we can kind of go into in a bit more detail in terms of broader lending criteria. And then we're going to have a look at the latest landlord rental barometer, which has been published by Fleet Mortgages to give you an idea in terms of yields region by region. And before we get stuck into the real bulk of today's MFB news, I just wanted to share that a couple of weeks ago I had the absolute privilege of interviewing a chap called Ben Rayner. Now, Ben is heading up a letting agent with a difference. So he is going to be running a Good Place lettings, which are going to be primarily based in East London, but they have really, really strong growth plans. Now, the reason that I wanted to interview Ben and bring kind of the essence of Good Place lettings to you guys is because they're a letting agent with a real social conscience. So essentially what they're going to be doing is that they're going to be reinvesting all of the profits they make as a letting agent back into helping homelessness in the local area, which is absolutely incredible. Now, this is based on a model that's been running in Scotland and has done incredibly well. And actually, A Good Place has got some really kind of ambitious growth plans. So you're going to see more of these letting agents popping up across the UK over the coming months and years. But for those of you who are paying your managing fees to your letting agent, and sort of thinking, as I do, got another £200-300 gone on, and I didn't have to do a huge amount to earn it. Actually, this one could be for you. So do have a watch of the video. You'll find a link to it in the comments section below. It's really, really interesting, and Ben is an absolutely great guy. So a good use of your time.
I think there's a lot of additional fees that are unnecessary a lot of the time. Yeah. So landlords are definitely feeling the pressure at the moment. Yeah. There's a lot of changes that's are not all that positive for landlords currently. So when the fees start going up and when additional costs start going on, then that's equally just as frustrating. So we really want to remove those extras, those unnecessary amounts, because we can do that all ourselves quite easily.
Another thing that you mentioned, which I didn't actually know, is that you charge your fee, your 12.5%, your monthly management fee, on a monthly basis. But actually, in London, that's not a given, is it? I didn't know this.
No, quite common for you to pay your fee up front. So whether it be a 12-month, a 2-year, a 3-year contract, then the longer the tenancy, the more fee you pay up front. Yeah. So that will change with the renters' rights, definitely, but certainly for the meantime that will continue to be the case. So yeah. Terrible for cash flow, not great if you've got a mortgage, and sometimes a bit of a surprise, because I don't think, as you said yourself, a lot of people aren't expecting that. So we'll absolutely be taking our fees on a monthly basis, and that will just continue throughout the tenancy. When the rent comes in, there'll be no charge until we find the right person.
That sounds really good. Yeah, because I think you mentioned if someone was, say, doing a 3-year let, they might not actually see any rent for 3 or 4 months. Yeah, it's awful. Yeah, so it's great you're not doing that. That's really absolutely fantastic.
Okay, so just a mini recap from last week. So what had happened is the bond market had gone into a fairly turbulent period of time, largely driven by concerns over the budget that Rachel Reeves announced back in the autumn, and also a lot of the posturing from Donald Trump, a lot of the comments he was making in terms of policy changes he's going to bring in, which would be very much inflationary, but also be very, very expensive in the USA. And obviously the USA is in a fairly perilous position in terms of its debt position anyway. If they increase their spending, this could make the country even more fragile in terms of its position financially. So that's impacting, essentially it's a bit like a credit rating, I suppose. So how financially safe is this place? Things tend to ripple across the pond. Our two markets are quite closely linked. So a combination of concerns about Trump, inflationary stuff, and also Rachel Reeves' budget, meant that actually gilts were having to offer a higher rate of return, so higher interest rate essentially for people to invest in the gilt market. So this in turn drove up swap rates, so we saw a wave of lenders repricing upwards. In terms of the repricing, we were seeing lenders putting rates and increasing them by up to sort of like 0.2, 0.4%, that kind of mark. So in the last week, we had the inflation news that came out last Wednesday. I remember saying on my video that it was being announced as I was recording the video, and we talk about that a bit more. So essentially what happened was inflation data came out better than expected. So actually the rate of inflation was lower than people had predicted. And this has kind of brought some confidence back to the market. So the net effect of that is that swap rates have eased off a smidgen. So as of last night, and again, this is early Wednesday morning, so as of Tuesday evening, 2-year swaps were at 4.18. To give you context, 1 month ago they were also at 4.18 and 1 year ago 4.25. So actually month on month we're kind of back to almost parity. Year on year we're in a slightly better position, so thumbs up for that. In terms of 5-year swaps, sadly still over the 4% marks. We haven't caught up with the gains we made before Christmas, which you know, like a 5-year swap to be under 4%, some weird fixation of mine. But 5-year swaps are just at 4.04%. So they have come down circa 0.25 from this time last week, which is really, really encouraging. Now, month on month, we are still slightly up. So 1 month ago, swaps were at 3.94. So they're circa 0.1% more expensive than they were 1 month ago. And year on year, sadly and annoyingly, swaps were 3.61. So we've still got some grounds to make up if we catch up and are ahead of the game for this time last year. But all in all, positive movement. So that's really, really good. Now, in terms of how this has then impacted the mortgage market. So as we know, things don't sort of change in terms of mortgage rates instantly. Some lenders are able to react very quickly to market changes. Some of them, their systems and processes may be slightly more clunky. But we have seen a series of lenders start to reprice down again, which is fantastic. Now, the kinds of reductions we're witnessing, they're kind of mirroring what we saw going up actually. So between sort of 0.15, 0.3% reductions, that kind of thing. So there's been a whole wave of them. I'm not going to name them individually. I don't think that's particularly helpful to you. And what I am going to do is just give you a kind of indication of where mortgage rates are sitting right now. Now, when I do this, just to recap the kind of logic behind where I pull these rates from. So what I'm not going to do is just quote the lowest interest rate on the market for a 2-year fixed rate on a buy-to-let mortgage, because that is nonsensical. Because actually the lowest 2-year fixed rate will come with an absolutely massive arrangement fee, which none of you want to pay. So what we're actually going to do is use the example of a mortgage amount of £250,000, and I'm going to look at the best cost over the fixed rate period or tracker rate period. So if it's a 2-year fix, how much interest would I pay on the 2-year fixed rate, and what are the fees that I need to pay, and which of the deals, looking at all of those numbers combined, gives you the best value over that period of time, because to my mind that's actually best deal. Now obviously different loan amounts would drive a different result in terms of which mortgage products work out best. So this is really just indicative for you to give you a flavour of where things are at the moment. So if we start off with an individual who's got a portfolio of less than 10 properties, raising a mortgage against a very standard property, 2-year fixed rates would be from 4.29% with a 995 fee, 5 years from 4.29% with a 995 fee, which is unusual, I appreciate. Tracker rates, we're going to throw these into the mix because people are very much thinking about trackers. The inflation news last week means that there's more pressure on the MPC to bring down base rate in February, and more on that in a moment. Tracker rates from 5.18 with a 1499 fee. Now, for those of you who are kind of sitting there thinking, tracker or fix, which way to go? I suppose if you were to take a 2-year tracker at 5.18, look at the 2-year fixes at 4.29, realistically over 2 years, how quickly is base rate going to come down? At which point does the tracker become lower than the fixed rate? Is that worth considering? And we'll come on to some thoughts around what's going to happen with base rate throughout the rest of this year in a moment. Now, in terms of limited companies, same premise, so 250k loan amount, 2-year fixes from 5.59 with a £1,999 fee, 5-year fixed rates from 4.94 but with a £5,000 fee, and tracker rates from 5.69 with a £1,999 £999 fee. So there you go. So that's kind of broadly where things are at the moment. Now, in terms of what I often get is people saying, oh, well, I spoke to another broker the other day and they were able to offer me a fixed rate of 3.5%. Why are yours so expensive? Just to really reiterate, we're looking at overall cost here. We're not going for the cheapest headline interest rate. We're looking at overall cost. I can quote you lots of really low interest rates, but going to come with 5, 6, 7% arrangement fees, not necessarily going to be the best thing for you. So just to kind of really reiterate the logic there. Okay, now because we had a bit of a tumultuous week last week, I just wanted to update you with some predictions for the rest of this year, because I think, these things do have an impact. And so I just think it's important to kind of share with you what the markets are really calling out in terms of some fairly key statistics for the rest of 2025. So at the moment, still very much a prediction that base rate will remain ending up at 4% by the end of this year. They are penciling in a reduction in February of 0.25%, but actually then, because there's actually still strong wage growth and low unemployment, so the employment market is actually holding incredibly firm. It's giving the MPC a bit of a headache. So actually their expectation is that the reductions will be much later in 2025. So 2 more reductions after the one in February, but later on in the year. Obviously the MPC are going to be incredibly cautious, trying to make sure they don't do it and make a decision which is going to kind of blow things up again. Wage growth is expected to be at 5.4%, so very, very healthy. When you compare that to expected inflation at 3.1%, actually wage growth is definitely outstripping inflation, which, as we know, for those of us who have experienced, we've all experienced inflation in the last couple of years, we will know that actually having a bit more disposable income every single month will be really, really fantastic. Unfortunately, that can be inflationary, and you can see the dilemma that the Bank of England, the MPC are now facing. So wage growth at 5.4, inflation at 3.1, GDP 1.1% growth, house prices still very much thinking that house prices would have grown on average across the UK by 4%. Okay, now a couple of pieces of lending criteria changes for you. First of all, Hampshire Trust Bank have started lending on holiday lets which have restrictions. Now, what this means is that some properties will have a legal restriction on them. It's not necessarily related to a sort of a licensing, a council thing. Actually, it's part of the property. It's part of the property kind of covenants. So essentially, some properties may say things like you can live in this property, but you have to rent it out for so many weeks a year, or conversely, you can rent this property out, but you have to live in it for so many weeks a year. So as soon as there's a kind of a restriction over the usage, a lot of lenders will get very, very nervous and walk away from it in the holiday letting space, and more broadly as well. So what HTB is saying is that actually they can consider properties with restrictions. They're going to cap the loan to value to 65%. For obvious reasons, because if a property has a restriction on it, it means that actually you're limiting the kinds of number of people that would want to buy it if the lender had to resell, and that can drive down the price. So that's what's going on there. Are they unique in this approach? No, but actually there's very few lenders who will take on holiday lets with restrictions. The other change this week is that West One have announced they're now going to be lending in Scotland, which may not sound like a big thing because we would be forgiven for thinking that all lenders lend in Scotland. Not so. So some lenders choose not to lend in Scotland because, first of all, the legal system, the way that you buy a house in Scotland is very different. There's also in the buy-to-let space a very different set of rules around renting properties out. And thirdly, obviously, when we think about Scotland, while you have some really big cities, you also have some incredibly remote locations. Some lenders simply take the view that they wouldn't be able to get their surveyors there to value the properties. It would impact service. They just don't have a kind of reach into that part of the market. So there are still lots and lots of lenders who are lending in Scotland, but actually not every lender does. Some lenders will say they lend in Scotland, but they only lend in the major cities. They wouldn't lend in, for example, on the Scottish Isles. So the reason this is really important is that if you are thinking about investing in Scotland, actually Scotland is doing incredibly well in the rental market, despite all the kind of headwinds that they have. Actually just be mindful that not every single lender is willing to lend there. Okay, now Fleet have released their latest rental barometer, and these things are always really interesting because what it is essentially is a load of data that Fleet are seeing coming across their desks for buy-to-let mortgage applications, and they're looking at the data and what they're seeing, and they're kind of drawing some really interesting conclusions and sharing them as reports to us, which is great of them to do. Now, just to kind of talk a bit about Fleet mortgages, so we can just kind of get a sense of the type of applications they're going to be seeing coming in. So Fleet are a specialist lender, so they can lend to individuals and limited companies. They don't mind how many properties you have in the background. They're lending on HMOs and multi-units. So if you had an individual who had 4 buy-to-lets, a very sort of strongly paid day job, and the buy-to-lets were in their personal names, and they wanted to remortgage their 2-bedroom terrace house, they wouldn't go to Fleet because they could access someone who was non-specialist and therefore cheaper. So you kind of get a sense immediately of the kinds of clients that Fleet are going to be seeing. So we're looking at a kind of certain segment of the market, but still the data is really interesting. So what they're saying is that essentially, first of all, the average rental yield across England and Wales has increased again, and it's now sitting at 7.4%. I mean, that's just incredible, isn't it? The North East continues to top the table with the highest average rental yield across England and the UK at 9.3%. Now, this was a bit of data that I found really interesting. So 11% of their applications came from first-time landlords. Now, the reason this is interesting is that, first of all, what this tells me is that a lot of these applicants are using limited company structures. So 11% of applications to Fleet being from first-time landlords is quite impressive in itself. But actually, the reason they would be using Fleet is because they must be using a limited company structure. So what I take away from this is that there's certainly an uptick in terms of first-time investors, which is really encouraging because there's obviously loads of headwinds, loads of reportings. The fact that people are still looking to enter the buy-to-let space really kind of reaffirms all the things that I believe in the PRS in terms of the great service and also the great investment opportunity that it can be. But also actually that these guys have been super smart and using limited companies as their investment vehicle for obviously the tax reasons. Now, just to kind of give you a further indication of the kinds of people that Fleet are dealing with, according to their applications, their landlords own on average 12 buy-to-let properties. So again, these guys are dealing in a certain sector of the market. And 79% of all applications through last quarter were from limited company borrowers, which is an 11% increase year on year. So again, Fleet are really kind of attracting limited company applications, which when we talk about the kind of space they're in, comes as no great surprise. So let's talk about yields. I know that some of you landlords have been holding off investing for a long period of time. You're getting really itchy feet. You're just waiting for rates to tick down that little bit further so they can kind of reach a number which kind of is palatable for you. So who's doing what? So the top of the table is currently the North East. Average yield there is 9.3%. We have Yorkshire and Humberside at 8.6%, the North West at 8.3%, and Wales at 8.2%. East Midlands 7.7%, the South West at 6.9%. West Midlands 6.6%, the South East 6.4%, East Anglia 6.3%, and Greater London at 5.8%. So actually, the yields are still very, very healthy across all regions. Obviously, some regions are better than others, and it depends what your kind of investment strategy is. Obviously, if you're looking for yields, you're probably not going to be kind of buying a property in Greater London. If you're really looking for yields, and obviously the North East and Yorkshire and Humber, North West, the kind of areas, I mean, it's always these sorts of areas really are the places to go. So just to kind of reiterate, so we've seen an average yield now in the UK of 7.4% year on year. That is an increase of 0.6% in terms of growth of rental yield across UK rented properties. So there you go, not quite as bleak as last week. We've seen mortgage rates start to soften a wee bit. We know that actually there's lots of good metrics this year. We know that wages are going to outstrip inflation. We know that house prices are going to go up. We know base rate is going to come down. So that's all really, really good. We also know that rents are continuing to rise and lenders are still looking to make good changes to lending criteria where they possibly can. So actually, all in all, I'm going to see this week as a positive one. Long may that continue. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to think about spring now with the slightly later evenings drawing in. And actually, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to hear birdsong in the morning when I'm up as well. Starting to feel a lot more optimistic about the future. Now, if you want to give us a call and have a chat about anything mortgage related, we'd love to hear from you. 0345 345 6788, or by all means have a look at our website mfbrokers.co.uk, where there is an absolute abundance of information. I'll see you same time next week.